Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by legendary director John Badham. Over the course of his long career, John has directed films such as Saturday Night Fever, Dracula, WarGames, Short Circuit, Stakeout, Blue Thunder, The Hard Way, Point of No Return, Bird on a Wire, Drop Zone, Nick of Time, Brother's Keeper, and many more. Furthermore, he has directed episodes for television, such as The Streets of San Francisco, Nikita, Crossing Jordan, Las Vegas, Psych, Rush Hour, Supernatural, 12 Monkeys, and many more. It is my pleasure to welcome John Badham.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Well, I'm happy to be here with you, with a film lover such as yourself,
Yes,
and all the people listening.
great. And John, as I mentioned in my introduction, you have covered a lot of ground, television, and of course the big screen. And how has the degree of responsibility and difficulty changed when you made the transition from television to film?
Well, of course, when you're doing motion picture film or for theatrical release, the director has a lot more responsibility and a lot more authority than when you're doing episodic television, where uh, where you're actually not the creative head. You're working for producers who've invented the show and who are running the show, and you're trying to give them something in the style of what they have designed. Whereas in a theatrical motion picture, you're much more involved in designing the style and making the creative decisions along the way. So it is quite a difference, and takes some adjustment on the part of the director.
Great, thank you, John. And I would like to talk about Saturday Night Fever, for instance, your big break as a movie director. The film was released in 1977. And please take me back, John, to the 70s. How did this film influence cinema and also the whole disco movement back in the day?
Well, I think at the time that Saturday Night Fever was released, there was a feeling that maybe the whole disco phenomenon was on the way out, and and some people were saying, "Why are you making a movie about disco when disco is dead?" Um, and apparently, we just revived it, brought it back from the dead, um, and kept it going for another year or two, which was very exciting. Even when there was a big event in Chicago in one of the baseball stadiums where they burned every disco record they could find in sight, uh, which I thought was very funny, and that we had worn out our welcome by then.
The film was tremendously successful and it didn't cost a lot of money. How did this kind of help shape your career? Were you actually able to, or given the chance to tackle any project that you wanted, or were you steered in a certain direction? I mean, the next one you did was a Dracula.
Well, I I was happy doing different kinds of films. I didn't want to be stuck in just one genre, like just doing youth dance films or romantic comedies. I like doing very different things. So going to a new version of Dracula seemed like great fun to me, and a real change of pace, which was followed by Whose Life Is It Anyway, which was a complete change of pace from the Dracula.
Yes.
So that kind of thing that I really enjoyed when I started on WarGames. what I knew about the computer would fit in a thimble. Uh, but it was a great learning experience. I mean, one of the exciting things about directing is you get to learn uh, a lot about topics that you might otherwise never know much about, and having to learn it really fast, and that is truly exciting to be able to do that. And if I were just doing the same kind of film over and over again, I'm afraid that I would get horribly bored and God forbid start to phone it in.
Yeah, and luckily you have a tremendous resume and you have been given the chance to work on a variety of pictures. I mean, it's not just, as you mentioned, comedy or action, so you haven't been typecast in a way that other directors have been typecast. So, many directors tend to focus on action or romantic comedy or horror or thriller. So you have a big variety in your filmography. And John, when you look back at filmmaking in the 70s, the 80s, and also the 90s, for instance, what do you miss the most about those days?
Well, for one thing, pictures didn't cost nearly as much, and there wasn't quite as much at stake. But but on the other hand, when I look at the pictures that were made this year, I'm thinking these are some really exciting films, and I've had a hard time filling out my Academy Awards ballot because there's so many films that I do like, and I think we've also seen motion pictures move into what used to be called television, but now I think it's not television anymore. It's a kind of new streaming medium that is taking advantage of bigger storytelling, bigger television receivers that before limited the scope of what you were able to do. So I find that in several ways we've moved into a whole new kind of world of storytelling.
And you've worked with so many great actors throughout your career. How does a director become an actor's director? I know you've covered that also in your books, which I recommend, of course, John Badham on directing, and I'll be in my trailer, The Creative Wars Between Actors and Directors. So how do you manage to become an actor's director?
Well, uh, I worked a lot before I started as a television director. I had worked a lot in theater during my college years, and just out of university, and I had gone to the Yale Drama School. So when you're working in theater, the uh, one of the main tools that you have to work with is the actor, and you need to get really good at working with the actor and learn a great deal of psychology and sympathy along the way with where the actor's head is. So coming into television and motion picture, the actor is not not quite as respected as in theater and is often ignored. Uh, you cast somebody good and you just leave them alone to do their thing. I see behind you Jodie Foster's picture in Silence of the Lambs. And, when you have an actress like Jodie Foster, God bless her, you just get out of her way and just don't mess her up. Uh, but actors like to be directed. Actors like to be spoken to. Jodie Foster likes to be, spoken to and not just left alone. So I've spent a lot of time trying to teach other young directors not to be afraid of actors, but to know that they're your creative partners and that they're going to help bring you so much to your film that it would be foolish to ignore them.
And you've told so many wonderful stories also in your books. And I would like to, of course, also mention The Hard Way, which features James Woods, Michael J. Fox, and also Annabella Shora, among others. And I seem to recall a part in the book when you also talked about Michael J. Fox's response when he was given a certain direction, and you mentioned something like hypothermia, something that that he didn't react well to. Can you recount that? What caused that, and what one shouldn't do when talking to actors?
Well, one of the things to never do, and I broke my own rule. It's not my own rule, it's a rule that every director should know, which is never give an actor a line reading. Don't ever tell them, how you think it should sound, because they resent that tremendously. And Michael, quite rightly, spoke up sharply about it, and and I apologized for my eagerness in trying to help him, and in fact, it made me go back and learn that, now what do you do when the line reading isn't quite the way you envisioned it? How do you do that? Well, the answer seems to be you want to focus the actor on what it is that they want in the scene. And if they know what they want in the scene, then the line reading that they give you is going to be much more accurate. And it's not going to be, you're not going to be asking the actor to, God forbid, imitate you, because that's what they resent mightily. And I had to apologize to Michael uh, for my foolish behavior. I knew better.
And John, when you work on an action picture such as The Hard Way or A Bird on a Wire or Point of No Return, Blue Thunder, how do you coordinate those pictures? How do you know how to involve a second unit and how to divide the work and how to communicate with your crew? How does that usually, or how has that worked in your great career, given the scope of some of the pictures you did?
Well, depending on what the action sequence is, there's a lot of conversation between production designers, between stunt coordinators, directors, and producers. How much can you afford to spend on a particular action sequence, and what will it take to do it, and how much will it cost? Uh, all of that stuff takes a long time to kind of work out and figure out how to do it safely and economically, but keep it exciting too. So something like Blue Thunder, with flying helicopters uh, and jet F-16 jets flying through the air, um, all of that became extremely complicated and gave us weeks and weeks of planning, so that when we get there on the day, everybody has a pretty good idea of exactly how we're going to get the shots that we need. We don't leave it till the last minute. We we probably, the one of the first steps is that we get storyboards made, storyboard artists to draw exactly what shots that we want, and then we can be really specific. We can show the cameraman or the stunt coordinator, this is the picture that we need it to look like. It's much more effective than if you just say a bunch of words. This picture, as they say, does all the work for you.
Yeah. And Blue Thunder is an interesting example because it not only features great photography and great aerial shots, but in terms of editing, it must have been a really big challenge to also edit the L.A. River sequence. And the editor was Frank Morris on this picture, right?
Yes, Frank Morris was my editor for almost 30 years. Uh, and and did wonderful work in all kinds of genres. In this particular film, that was so much work to be done, and the action sequences were so extended that he brought in another great editor that I worked with, Ed Abrams, and the two of them shared different sequences because otherwise we might still be editing the film today. 30, 30 years later, we might still be trying to get it done. But with an editor, you're counting on them seeing finding the story that you want to tell and finding the best way to tell that story. And they're not just making the cuts that you dictate. They're making they're making their own suggestions and bringing their own vision to things that you share. And they're another one of your great creative partners.
I would like to mention your collaboration with Richard Dreyfuss. Obviously, you've worked with him a couple of times on two Stakeout movies, for instance, and also Whose Life Is It Anyway? And Whose Life Is It Anyway, I believe, is one of your best pictures. And it's a drama, respectively also a comedy to a big extent. But it deals with a subject matter which has been the object of debate and obviously has been a hot potato for many years, euthanasia. And how was the film received back then, or did you have, let's say, a certain amount of backlash from even tackling this sort of subject, if I may ask?
Well, it is, as you say, a hot button thing, and some people believe that no matter what happens, you have to keep people alive, and and yet the film asks the question very very clearly: whose life is it anyway? Uh, if a person, feels that they don't want to continue to live, and it's a medical matter, that the quality of their life is so damaged that they don't want to continue to live. It's a choice that you have to take seriously, and maybe you don't let them automatically just go and be put to death in some way or another, but it's certainly not something that you should ignore. And of course, we've seen tremendous fights happen even in going into the U.S. Congress a few years ago about trying to keep a woman alive that other people were arguing was already beyond hope. So uh, people people almost to a man believe in, prolonging life as much as we can, but there are certainly circumstances where that's not the best idea. And so it was interesting to get in there and grapple with that idea from both points of view.
And the film delivers thought-provoking impulses, and it also clearly shows that one incident or one accident can drastically change the course of your life. I mean, in this case, it was a terrible car accident which basically left his character paralyzed permanently.
And in the particular part of this story, it took away from this character, Ken Harrison, the ability to pursue his what his life's ambition was as a sculptor and an artist, because he was so paralyzed that he could no longer continue that, and just confined inside his body. And it wasn't as though he was suddenly going to become a poet or something else, like a scientist who could do astrophysics in his head, um, as Stephen Hawking's, could. Um, you had taken away the complete enjoyment of any life at all. So 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 it it put him in a terrible position of what to do.
I think Richard Dreyfuss is a tremendous actor. Would you say that he can switch very easily from genre to genre? I mean, obviously, I mentioned that Whose Life Is It Anyway is a drama slash a film with comedic aspects, because I think you need to kind of balance a movie of this kind, because if it had been presented as a pure drama, it would have been really hard to stomach the film, because it's such an intense subject matter. But how his character delivered of the lines and how he said certain things, the kind of humor that he used to deal with the situation, and then you also worked with him on Stakeout, for instance. How do you perceive him as an actor and as a craftsman?
He's a wonderful craftsman. He has first of all great intelligence and and a great sense of humor. He's extremely bright, uh, and yet he doesn't take himself too seriously. So he can usually find the humor in almost any situation. Um, so going from Whose Life Is It Anyway, where he's playing dealing with a serious situation but trying to deal with it with humor, was easy for him, and yet uh, going into a much more comedic situation as in Stakeout, that's just uh, wonderful inspiration for him. And we had a beautiful cast with Emilio Estevez, who who also has a great sense of humor, and the two of them brought to the film so much humor that it was not on the page at the time, that it made it a much better film than even it started out. It started as a wonderful script, but they just brightened it up considerably by what they brought to their relationship as characters.
Yeah. And Madeline Stowe also was wonderful in the first Stakeout. And I also must mention another Stakeout, which features a wonderful scene, the dinner scene with Rosie O'Donnell and also Dennis Farina. I thought that was beautifully timed in pure comedy gold.
Oh, it was, and Rosie, of course, everybody knows that she's very funny, but Dennis Farina gave us many wonderful comedic performances over time. It almost felt unexpected. You expect humor from Rosie O'Donnell, but it was always kind of surprising when Dennis would come up with the kind of humor that he came up with. And the dinner scene is certainly one of the funniest scenes that I've ever had the joy to be able to direct. That with the dinner scene in Saturday Night Fever. I think maybe I love dinner scenes because I'm just recalling one that's in WarGames with the parents, Matthew Broderick's parents, and the father trying to eat butter corn using a slice of bread.
As I understand, a different director had been attached at first, and it was supposed to have a much darker tone, and then he left due to a disagreement, and then you became the director. And how did you bring the ship around? How did you manage to deliver one of the great iconic films of the 80s?
I absolutely fell in love with the script when they called me and they said we're having a problem uh, with this film. Would you take a look at it? And I read it and I thought, well, this is really exciting. And I said, can I see what work has been done up to this point? And when I looked at the film, I said, well, we just have two completely different opinions about this. The original director uh, was is extremely talented and very very bright, and he had taken a kind of a dark approach to this as a very dark comedy, and I thought it was much funnier than that. So so my job was to kind of turn everything around and move it with more of a sense of humor. And uh, for example, early on, the first scene that I got to redirect was when Matthew Broderick brings Ali Sheedy up upstairs in his house into his bedroom to show her how he can change her grade on the computer. Now, uh, that was originally done as something really dark and scurrilous, and kids knowing they were doing a really bad thing, but they were going to do it anyway, and saying, no, how can we make this funnier? And one of the first things they did was to mess up his bedroom the way teenagers leave bedrooms, with underwear strewn all over the place and the bed unmade, and him coming into the bedroom and suddenly having to try to hide underwear that's on the lampshade and make the bed, all without looking like he's frantic, which he obviously is. That that simple shift in tone uh, put the scene off in a different direction, and uh, it is inspired the actors to do different behavior than they had been doing before, where it was like they were getting away with something really evil. But here it's like, ooh, this is exciting. This is fun.
John, you're also a professor, and when you talk to your students, how do you communicate the skills a good director should have? Or let me rephrase, which aspects of the filmmaking process do you teach? Do you tend to tackle every aspect of the filmmaking process, or do you want to focus on certain areas at first?
Well, I focus on two things at first. One is, how do you break down a script, any script, in a way that you get to the key of what it's really about? Uh, and have devised a list of 12, 13 questions that will help you open up a script and give you insight into something that maybe isn't clear to you initially. So that's the first thing, is how do you figure out what it is you're going to direct in the first place? And now how do you communicate that to your actors and get them to understand what you're going for? And how do you work with the actors instead of being afraid of them? Many young directors, for example, will hide behind the camera and hide behind their video assist and kind of let the actors go off on their own. And we're trying to teach them, you know, how to work with the actors and how to help them give you the best performances. So I focus on that, and that's what my two books that you very kindly mentioned uh, really focus a lot on. You know, how do you get the best out of your actors, and what do you do when actors don't do what you want them to do? How do you work with people who are not deliberately problematic, but they have their own way of looking at things?
I can imagine that certain scenarios are relatively tricky, and of course, some people tend to have an ego, and then a big debate unfolds, which obviously costs time and also money, because then you won't get ahead as scheduled.
Right. Well, if you don't get if you don't get the actors' enthusiastic participation, then everything just takes much longer and costs much more, and you don't get as good a product. The last thing you want is a reluctant actor who says, "Well, I'll do what you want, but don't count on it being any good." Fine. I mean, that's the worst thing that can happen.
When you look back at your career, can you recount a certain scenario or one film or two movies where you had to be especially inventive, as obviously maybe 20, 30 years ago, even 40 years ago, it didn't have a big budget or the biggest budget, or technology wasn't obviously as advanced as it is now?
Well, when you have a lot of special effects, um, before digital digital media and CGI got to the state that it is now, the um, filmmaker has to be extremely inventive. And how can you get something done that seems on paper to be impossible? And this goes all the way back to people dealing with this process all the way back to the Lumiere brothers, and uh, at the beginning of motion pictures, on how do they do a trip to the moon? Uh, how do we deal with westerns with people riding on horses and falling down and being chased um, in a stagecoach chase? How does that get done? And we have to find ways to do it without killing people. Whereas now, a lot of those kind of effects can easily be done in the computer, and it takes a lot of the magic away, because I think our audiences are so sophisticated that they know, well, that's just the computer doing it. Whereas if I see in Stagecoach, for example, um, a stuntman diving onto a bunch of horses pulling a stagecoach, and then falling down and having the horses run over him, and know that we didn't kill anybody, that's something that's very impressive. I think we get a lot of that philosophy is reflected in the Mission Impossibles that Tom Cruise does, where he says, "No, I want to see that I'm really flying this helicopter, that I'm really taking this motorcycle over a cliff and then going to parachute down." Um, he tries to do as much of that as possible, and I'm always terrified that one day something is going to go wrong, and something awful might happen, God forbid, to him. But he knows, he understands really well that the audience knows what kind of risks he's taking, and they appreciate that, and they know that it's not a CGI Tom Cruise flying through the air. Uh, it's the real deal, and I think the box office grosses uh, reflect people's appreciation for that kind of filmmaking.
John, I would love to talk about film music just a bit. You've done 9 movies, if I recall correctly, with Arthur Rubinstein. You have done 3 movies with Hans Zimmer and one with John Williams, for instance, which was Dracula. And how do you collaborate with a composer? How do you communicate what you want them to do and how to enhance your vision as a director?
I think it's almost the same as working with a cinematographer, where you get together and try to say, what do we think that this might sound like? What kind of music uh, do we think, if we were picking a classical composer, would this be something like a Mozart, or would it be like Beethoven, or is it going to be John Cage or Igor Stravinsky? You know, let's find things that where we can find common ground. in the same way with a cinematographer, where you're saying what kind of lighting in films do we like that works for this particular movie. So uh, so I may be bringing music to the composer that I think might work, and he or she is bringing music to me that they think, and we just kind of collaborate back and forth, so that um, we try to be on the same page. And there are some times when the composer will play something for me that we go, well, I don't, can you try a different version of this? This doesn't work, or something that's completely unexpected and very exciting. So Arthur Rubinstein, for his score for Blue Thunder, uh, was doing a lot of synthesizer music that had not been done very much at all in films up to that point. Uh, some things from Tangerine Dream that Billy Friedkin used uh, were along those lines, and we wanted to do more of it. We wanted to have more of that kind of synthesized sound, not a big orchestra, but something that had that kind of slightly artificial mechanical feeling uh, in the world of 1984, which is when this film came out. 1984, of course, as reflected in George Orwell's novel, which we thought that there were parallels with Blue Thunder. So it's a wonderful collaboration because I get to go over to where Hans Zimmer's studio on films that he did for me, like Bird on the Wire. And Hans Zimmer composes in the middle of the night. So I would have to go to bed early, get several hours sleep, and then get up at midnight and go over and work with him until till dawn and see what he was coming up with. But it was just fun to be there. I mean, I could have left him alone, I suppose, but that was just would have been missing a great opportunity to watch one of the great composers uh, of our time.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Hans. And of course, I like a lot of the music featured in your films, which is featured in your films. But one of my favorite cues is called Happy Birthday, Maggie. Hans wrote it for the film Point of No Return. And it actually plays when Gabriel Byrne takes Bridget Fonda out to dinner. She believes he's taking her to dinner, but he actually takes her to her very first assignment, and that's one of the best cues in all of your films.
Oh, it's glorious. It's uh, very exciting piece of music, and it's very uplifting, which is great counterpoint to what's actually turns out to be happening. We think this is going to be a wonderful celebratory kind of moment, but instead it turns very dark and quite frightening as she learns that she has to assassinate somebody, and then with no help from anybody else, have to escape uh, all the people that are after her.
John, we've reached 10:45. Do we have to stop today?
I do have to stop. I have people waiting for me, and I'm sorry to cut you short, and I'm happy to give you more time at another time if you'd like.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's do another episode. I mean, I'm so glad that we got to do this in the first place, and now we have spoken for about 45 minutes.
All right. Well, then keep emailing me, and we'll work out another date that's good for both of us, and and continue this conversation. Keep it going.
Great. John, thank you very much. Stay safe, stay
Thank you.
healthy.
Thank you. Thank you for all your wonderful comments too, and there are sequences and musical cues and scenes that you recollect in this conversation that I'm so appreciative that, oh my God, somebody actually got it. You understood what I was trying to get, and thank you for that.
Thank you for your great contributions to the world of cinema. Thanks again. Let's wrap up for today and let's talk soon, John.